This will be the first time teaching with my hair out ever. Okay, so we're gonna start out today Photoshop block number 4 with layer adjustments, because this file you have been working with before. It's the child statue. So this is not something unfamiliar with you unless you did not attend that class. So let's open this up in Photoshop. I'm just gonna drag it down in Photoshop and say, hey little statue, how are you doing? And okay, so let's watch this file when it comes to layers. Over here at our right in the layers panel, we have some layer adjustments. Unless you know Photoshop, you're probably not familiar with layer adjustments yet, but you will become today. So when I switch one of these layer adjustments on, it's actually like a layer. That's why it's called a layer adjustment. It's a layer itself. And if I switch on the visibility, if I toggle visibility on and off with these layer adjustments, you can see what they're actually doing to the picture. See, it's giving some kind of blue filter to the picture. This blue filter is actually color balance. This symbol you can see right here, this icon right here, is color balance, and up here we got the symbol for levels, the icon for levels, and I can just switch that on as well, and it brightens up the picture. When you make a layer adjustment, you can always go back inside of it and change how it looks. You can just double click the icon, the layer thumbnail, and a panel will pop up where you can actually see how could I make this differently. And you can see I've already been adjusting in here. I've already been adjusting some parts of the adjustment. So the levels adjustment is exactly the same as inside of image adjustments levels. Of course, I cannot add in image adjustment levels to a level adjustment. That's like saying I want to use level on top of my levels. So, but naturally I could be using an image adjustment by going down to a level to a layer where there's actually something in it. Here I could easily use levels, no problem. The problem though with using image adjustments on top of a picture, a layer, is that once you do it, the only way you can actually get back to what it was before is by undoing or using history brush tool. So that means if you make 50 actions in your history, then you suddenly can't go further back, so you're not able to get back to before you actually made this image adjustment. So the great idea about using layer adjustments is you can always go back. You can always say, I don't want this levels to affect my picture anyways. Then you can just switch off the visibility, or you can delete it. You can delete that layer. So you're making a non-permanent change. You decide yourself when you don't want that change anymore. So you're actually not directly destroying parts of the picture. You're not damaging pixels and making them white or making them some other color. You're actually telling, I want to be able to always go back in time to my original by just switching off the adjustments.
I couldn't see that.
Oh,
Yeah.
you couldn't see it. Is my head blocking?
Yeah.
Cool.
What did you do?
What did I do?
I couldn't see it.
You mean what? I switched these on and on visibility wise.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, but instead of us adjusting some layer adjustments that's already there, I suggest that we actually create our own layer adjustments and actually work with the masks which are located next to the adjustments. There are some white masks here that's called masks, and we'll try editing them as well afterwards. While these two are selected, I'm just going to click the delete key called backspace, so we delete the two layer adjustments we don't need. It's really getting hot in here with my hair out. You have no idea how hot it becomes with all this hair. But I need to do it for the camera. Because I look silly when my hair is up on camera. So, okay. Vanity, my favorite sin. Can anyone tell me what what movie that quote is from? Vanity, my favorite sin.
Maybe if I hear
You-
German, I know.
You're telling me you don't have none of you watched the Devil's Advocate? What the? That's with Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves.
Maybe, I don't know.
I'm very disappointed in you. When we get to week 4 and you should study to exam, you go watch that movie instead. Yeah. You should go watch that. Okay, so layer adjustments. How do we make layer adjustments? There are several ways of doing so. I'm just going to show you 3 quick ways. Layer adjustments, you can do it either in layer, new adjustment layer, and here you have different varieties. Notice that it's the same. You can fetch here as you can inside of image adjustment, except for a few which you cannot choose. But the ones we've been using, all of them are here. So levels, for example curves, we haven't used that yet, but you're going to get into that in the future. Levels is here, color balance, hue saturation, and photo filter, all of the ones we've been using. And perhaps some of you have been using black and white as well, to make pictures black and white. In the proper way, not by desaturating pictures. And perhaps some of you have been trying vibrance as well. That's a great tool for changing the mid-tone colors inside of your picture. Okay, so all of them, almost all of them are in here. All of the ones which were inside of image adjustment. Okay, so I'm gonna, instead of just adding it from here, I'll show you 2 other places you can locate them, because this is probably the place where it takes longest to get to the adjustment. So you also have it over here in the inside of the panel called adjustments. It's normally located somewhere around the center of the panels, in the middle of the panels. Adjustments. And if you can't find it out here because you're messing around with your Photoshop all the time like this, blah 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 blah, and then you, oh, it's in front of my picture, I'm just going to remove that. Well, of course, then you cannot find it. But just to make sure that there's order inside of your Photoshop, you can always go to Window, Workspace, Reset Workspace, Reset Essentials, like that. And I'm just going to expand my toolbox right here, so it's in 2 columns. Okay, here we have it again, adjustments. And here you can just actually click one of these, or you can scroll past it so you can see what it actually does. So let's say it's levels. I can just click levels, and you'll notice immediately it will make a new adjustment. I'm just going to click undo to show you the last way of creating an adjustment. That's inside of my layers panel at the bottom. There's like a contrast icon. One of the students was telling me, isn't that like a half moon? And yeah, probably it's night versus day. Whatever. Yeah, whatever. So you can just choose from here as well all of these different adjustments, and you can actually also choose some different ones that you normally get in the fill menu. You know, the menu you get by shift backspace clicking, which is solid color, gradient, and pattern. But those are not relevant to us. They have nothing to do with layer adjustments. So we can choose it here as well. Let's just try taking levels. Okay, and this way we can actually brighten up the entire picture. Some of you, when you start changing these properties up here, let's just brighten up the picture by moving the white slider to the left. You notice that it affects the entire picture. It's not just the statue, it's also the background. So some of you though are only affecting the background. If that's the case, if you're perhaps located here with your layer adjustment between the two layers, it will only affect the bottom layer. So, like with any layers, if you place it between other layers, it's only gonna affect those that are below it and not the ones that are above it. So, and if you want to try moving a layer adjustment like I did, please do not try moving it by grabbing the mask itself, because if I grab the mask and put it somewhere else, it's going to go to some other layer. So definitely do not grab the mask, this white box right here. Instead, move it by dragging the icon for the level adjustment. So, because the mask can be moved to any other layer, so, and we don't want that. That's not what we're intending to do. Okay, so one of the smart parts about our layer adjustment is not only can we actually go back in time at any point and just toggle off the visibility, but we can actually also again double click the level adjustment in case we're not happy with it, and then you can just make it like you want to. And okay, let's say I'm happy with this, happy. Then you can actually also use the mask, which is over here, to decide which parts of the picture you want affected. So let's click once on the mask. You'll notice when I clicked on it, it shows that it's selected by showing a black frame around the corners of the mask. And actually, if I wanted to see the mask instead of my picture, I could also Alt click my layer mask, hold down Alt, then click once on this mask, and you'll notice that it shows a white picture. That's actually the mask it's showing. And so you can actually, when on the mask, you'll also notice that you'll, instead of colors, you get black and white or tones of gray. There's no colors when working with masks. Masks only understand 256 values of black to white. And the reason why I'm saying 256 is that there is 255 tones, but actually there's also the tone 0. You know, the tone 0, which is total black. Yeah. So that's 256 shades of gray. That's a lot more than the movie. Okay, so you can actually paint on this mask. It's the reason why I'm showing you that we're inside the mask now. Remember, that's by alt-clicking the mask once over here, is that then you get a clear idea that you can actually paint on it. And what does this actually do to the picture? Well, if I try going back into the picture, that's by alt-clicking the mask once again, or by just clicking once on another layer. So you can get out in two different ways: alt-clicking on the mask or just clicking on another layer. And whoa, here you see that actually something weird happened to my picture. I'm actually, when painting with black on this mask, I can also just click my mask again without alt-clicking it. Then I can start painting it again, and you see what I'm actually painting is what was there before. I'm actually painting history back. I'm removing the levels from the area I'm painting in. So you see, it was really dark before this picture. But I can also just paint back the levels. So you see, if I switch to using white in my foreground color and start painting with my brush, I can actually paint my levels back once again. The cool part about this is actually you can decide which parts of your picture need the adjustment and which parts does not need the adjustment. And you could actually make like a gradient as well. You could take the gradient tool, which is located over here in the toolbox, that makes a transition between, right now it's a transition from black to white, but black means that it's not affecting the area. You notice if I painted black, I'm telling the adjustment not to adjust the picture. If I'm painting with white, I'm telling this area needs to be affected. So white means that I'm affecting with the level adjustment. Black means that I'm not affecting. So if I take a black and white gradient, I could choose there to be a transition from the picture not being affected by the adjustment towards being affected. So let's try using the gradient tool, and it's most likely already set, unless you've been messing around with it. It's most likely set to use a black to white gradient up here. You can choose between other gradients. No matter which one you choose from here, it's going to be black and white anyways, because you can only paint with black to white inside of masks. But I'm going to choose the first one. That's a nice gradient, and I'm going to make sure that it's a linear gradient, that it's going from one point to another in a linear fashion. Okay, so this one will start out with white. You see from left it's going to be white, towards right it's going to be black. That means from start it's going to be white, to end it's going to be black. And since black means it will not be affected in that area, we just need to determine which area do we not want to include the layer adjustment to. So let's say I want the sky to be brighter, but I do not want the bottom of this picture to be brighter. That means that the blackness needs to go towards the bottom of the picture. Black was not affecting an area. So what I'm going to do is, if it goes from white to black, sorry about that, I'm just going to put it to no sound. And that's even a recording. Now everyone is seeing me with my mobile phone. Fantastic. Fantastic. That's really great. Okay, so since it goes from white to black, and I want the sky to be the one that's affected, and white will affect, my starting point will be the top. And I'm going to click with my gradient tool and drag it all the way towards the bottom. And when I reach the bottom, I'm going to release my mouse button. And you'll notice then that the sky becomes brighter, while gradually down towards the bottom it becomes darker. Actually, it becomes more what it was before towards the bottom. So let's see the difference. I'm going to switch visibility on and off. You can see now we have a brighter sky, but towards the bottom it's almost the same as before. Okay, so how could we actually use this in a fashion which makes sense to us? Perhaps we wanted the sky to be another color. Perhaps it's a sunset. So I'm going to make a new adjustment. This could be any kind of color changing option. So perhaps just color balance is fine. I'm going to choose color balance. You could choose something else if you want to. Inside of color balance, it looks a bit different than the image adjustment color balance. I'm just going to show you the color balance inside of image adjustment. You notice here the tone balance, shadows, midtones, highlights are located at the bottom, while when you go into color balance here, it's actually located at the top. So don't get confused by that. The options are the same as with the regular image adjustment. Okay, so here you can change the midtones. Perhaps I want this picture to become more purple. Just ignore that it's affecting the bottom, because perhaps we only want the sky to be affected. well, we can change that afterwards with the gradient tool. And I want it to be perhaps the highlights as well to be even brighter, pinkish. Oh yeah, we like that. We like that. Okay. Cheers. Yeah. I think we've had enough fun with the colors, so let's try affecting the mask once again. So down here, I'm gonna again use the gradient tool, and I'm just gonna click and drag from the top towards the bottom, and you'll notice that suddenly it gets pink towards the top, but it stays the same towards the bottom. Then I'm like, oh my god, suddenly the child has a purple head. What am I supposed to do about that? Well, you notice, painted with black, yes, painted black, great Rolling Stones track. So you can actually just Painted Black from Rolling Stones is the title song, the title soundtrack for The Devil's Advocate. So I'm really amazed that you haven't seen that movie. Okay, so you could select, first of all, you can actually work in here by just, you can paint as you want, if you want this kid to become exactly like he's supposed to. But instead of actually just painting normally with your brush, you can also use the selection tools. So perhaps you know that you only want the edges of him to not become purple. Well, okay, some of you will be starting to use the magnetic tool to say, okay, I only want to affect this statue right here. And then some of you will be like, why is that person using so much time to select something that has already been selected once to put on a new layer? And I'll be like, yes, that's the correct way of thinking. So tell me, how can I select this kid without selecting any other parts of the picture by just a simple click? Yeah.
If you go on the layer with this baby one.
The baby. The baby layer. Okay, layer 1. Okay. I go to layer 1 and then what do I do?
Yeah, then you can select it with one of, I don't know.
With one of, I don't know.
Yeah, one of these two. It doesn't matter because you wouldn't select any other thing.
Yeah. Okay, so can anyone tell me what to do when I'm at layer 1?
Create a mask.
Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna do the fast way I could create a mask, but let's try not to work with a mask inside of a mask, because that's just gonna make a lot of masks. So perhaps choose select pixels by right clicking the layer thumbnail down here, right clicking it and choosing select pixels. So we only get the child selected, the statue selected. I'm quite sure that's not a baby. As I recall, babies have when they reach a certain age, we call them children.
Yeah, it's a child.
Yeah. Okay, cool. There's also another way which is even faster to selecting this kid, which is holding down. What?
Or you can just move the layer. I mean, you can put the color layer, color balance layer below the kid, so it adjusts on the background.
Oh yeah. That's something we'll get to in like 5 minutes. But thank you for pointing that out. Cool. So you could also just command click. That's actually a very nice shortcut to remember. Command click a layer thumbnail of course on a PC that's control click and you'll have it all selected. Really a shortcut worth remembering, especially when you start working with channels on second semester. So command click on the layer thumbnail, not on the layer itself, because that will do nothing. It has to be on the icon. Okay, so when it's selected here, we can actually just go to the mask again, the color balance mask, and we can just paint it black like he said. And can anyone tell me the shortcut for painting everything black if I already have foreground color set to black? How can I actually just quickly fill it with black? And don't tell me to use the paint bucket tool. So how, if not using the paint bucket tool, how can I just quickly fill this area with black? There's a shortcut for it. What? Alt backspace. Yes, precisely. So because the reason I can click Alt backspace is because Alt backspace uses the foreground color, while Command backspace uses the background color. So if I use Command backspace, backspace is delete. If I use Command backspace, it will paint with white. If I use Alt backspace, it will paint with black, because its foreground color set to black. You see, then it will paint black inside of the mask area. And this kit will actually have the feather values and the extraction values that you set in when you extracted the picture originally. So it will not just be a hard transition how you paint it black, it will actually have softness towards the edges, because originally I set a feather value at the edges of 3 pixels, I think. But some of you will be like, oh no, he's being affected too much. I just wanted him to be affected like semi-much. Well, then you could actually, I'm just going to click undo. Then instead you could actually go to the mask again, and instead of choosing black, you could actually choose a variant of gray and then paint him gray, and you'll notice then he'll be affected. Not as much, but still a bit. So you can see down here that now he's actually been painted gray. Oh yeah, we like that. I'll click my way out of this. There's no gradient on him. That's correct. Oh no! But there are other ways of dealing with that. For example, you could also make a separate gradient for him. You could actually just go inside of, let's say, I'll just go inside of my layer mask again by simply alt clicking on the layer mask right here, and while my selection is active, I could make a totally different gradient for him, a gradient which goes from perhaps not white, because that will be too much, but gray to black. And then I can just say, okay, black is my starting color, and it will go towards gray at the end. So my starting point will be down here, and I'll move it up towards here. I think this gray is too dark. I'm just going to brighten it up a bit. So from starting point black towards gray, starting point will then be where the black is already, and up towards this area. And then you'll see you can actually give him a different gradient. Perhaps a gradient in another direction as well, if you want to. And perhaps it's easier just to go out of the mask again, just to see how it's affecting the picture. So I'm gonna alt click on my mask, and here we can just try using the gradient differently to see how does it affect the picture. And naturally when I reach the purple ass statue. Yeah. Okay. You can actually also zoom out just to get a gradient with a longer transition. So it's actually a gradient which goes outside of the picture. I often do that to make very, very, very smooth gradients. Zoom out very far to get like a gradient from one color to another which is almost not visible. So it's so smooth that it's hard to see that it actually is a gradient. But that often makes a more realistic result. But I don't think I want any gradient at all inside of him, because I don't want his head to be like that. So I'm just gonna paint him black. Perhaps by just holding down Alt, backspace. If you want to switch, switch between black and white quite quickly, you can always. Oh, let's just make that another color. You can always just hit X. You see, when you hit X on your keyboard, you switch between foreground and background color. So also if you hit, whoops, whoa, no, I do not want liquefy. I hit the wrong key. Shift X. I'm trying to remember a shortcut, but it seems like I can't remember it. Okay, but X will switch between these two. And that's actually very nice when working with masks, because then if I wanted to adjust some parts of the mask, let's say I want some parts of the mask to stand out, I'm just going to select him again. Then you can quickly switch from white to black. I'll just click X now to switch to black. So it's a very fast way of changing. And instead of actually painting with black and white, you can change the opacity. I'm painting with pin light, what the? Instead of just painting normally with black and white, you can also change the opacity. If I set my opacity to 50% while painting black, it's gonna paint 50% gray. Of course, next time you paint 50% gray on top of 50% gray, that's not gonna give total black or total white in the reverse situation. So it's gonna give 50% plus 50%, which will be 75%. Okay, so that means actually now we can make a gradual transition, especially if the hardness is set very low. So here you can actually smoothly paint your way through the figure, deciding which areas should be affected and which should not. Kind of like just letting some areas be affected by the purple, perhaps some areas which you think is more towards the coloring in the background, perhaps the edges. You want the top edges right here to be purple, but none of its back. Well, then you can actually just switch with X between. If you took off too much, you can just put some in again by switching to white, and then afterwards switch to black again and start just changing it a bit again towards the edges. So I'm just painting with, actually if I go into my mask again, you can see what I'm actually doing is I'm just painting the edges, painting brightness towards the edges, and that will make the edges more purple, because my color balance was to make stuff more purple. So I think I'll also do that right here. Alt clicking to get out. And notice when every time I say Alt click, you'll notice if you watch movies about Photoshop and so on, they'll always say Option click instead. So on YouTube and whatever place you can find videos about it, even though it's named Alt on your keyboard, they will in movies say Option. So that was just a bonus info. Okay, so let's try making some adjustments which will not affect the child at all. So I'm just gonna go down to the layer where I have my child, and I'm gonna add another layer adjustment. This layer adjustment is going to affect only the background. So what I'll do is I'll just again we'll be located at the layer where the child is in, because that will make the layer adjustment in the wrong place. But we need that just to get some experience. So let's say we want black and white. Yeah, let's make it black and white. Boom, black and white. So this becomes a very weird picture because we're telling it to become black and white, but on top of the black and white we're telling it to become purple. Okay, but let's go down and try affecting the picture. If I do not want this layer adjustment, if I do not want it to affect the entire picture, so everything becomes black and white, but I only want it to affect the background, then I can just move my layer adjustment down between the two layers, down between layer number 1 and layer number 0. I can move it down there, and remember not to move the mask, but to remove the adjustment itself. Okay, so now you see he gets his coloring back, but the background does not. Actually, most of the times when working with masks, I prefer my mask being black from the start, meaning it affects nothing, and then I normally paint my way towards white. So I'm actually making decisions on where should this adjustment affect the picture. So let's try just with foreground color set to black and view being located on the new mask itself, the black and white mask. Let's then try Alt backspace clicking to fill this mask with black. So then we get our coloring back, and then you can actually start with a white brush, painting in areas you want black and white. So let's say you want the right part of the picture more black and white. Well, you could paint with white then. You could paint with white, set to a low opacity, meaning that it will actually not be entirely white, but more grayish. You see, when I start painting down here on my layer mask thumbnail, it will show that some gray is starting to appear. And actually this area right here will become more and more black and white the more I paint over it. And that's really great for pictures which has too much coloring in some areas. Then I can just tell them to become more black and white in those areas. Naturally, it does not become totally black and white because I have this color balance up here. If any of you are getting confused by this color balance up here, you can just switch it off. Let's try switching it off just temporarily, and you can see that you're actually painting the entire picture in areas black and white, which is, I think, a neat feature, because then you can decide that areas need to stand out in color and others are not allowed to stand out in color. Naturally, we cannot affect the child because he's on the layer in front of the adjustment. He's on top of the adjustment. He cannot be dominated by the adjustment. But he could if I moved the adjustment up on top of him, then he will become black and white in those areas as well. Okay, one more thing. How can I make sure to affect only the child with a level adjustment that is put on top of both the child and the background? So one last layer adjustment. I'm just gonna switch this one on again. This one called color balance. I'm gonna switch the opacity to only be 40%, because you can actually change a mask to not affect entirely the picture, but just in percentages affect the picture by setting the opacity lower. I think I'll set mine to 30%. And on top of the child, I'll just add some other color balance. Let's say, no, sorry, not color balance. I'll just say photo filter. Let's give him some photo filter to deal with. And I'll just switch this up very high. Right now it's a warming filter and it's affecting the entire picture. Let's perhaps make him more orange. Orange, yeah. And okay, so I'm happy with this color, but I do not want it to affect the entire picture. So what I could do is make a clipping mask. Make a clipping mask. And what a clipping mask is that you're actually telling some effects or some layer that it needs to only affect parts of the picture by indicating which layer should be used for clipping out the area where the effects should take place. So it's kind of like taking scissors and just cutting out an area which is only allowed to be affected. And since I already have something cut out, I have this child right here cut out. You can see on layer number 1 he's cut out, he's extracted from the original background. So I can actually use him as a clipping mask. So if I tell him to become clipping mask for the photo filter which I just made, the photo filter will only affect the things which are inside of him, inside of the clipping mask. Yes. So how do we make a clipping mask? We simply hold down Alt while we're in between two layers. While we're in between two layers, we hold down Alt, and it will show this little icon, little tiny icon with an arrow pointing downwards. And while you see this icon, you need to click your mouse. So it's Alt, you're holding down Alt, you're standing between two layers, and then you just click. And you see, now he will only be affected. That's a clipping mask. And then afterwards, I can actually start with my black color to paint areas inside of my mask of this photo filter. I can start painting some of the photo filter so it vanishes more in other areas by changing the mask. So I can actually, you can see here, I can just start painting the photo filter differently by painting black inside of this mask. Always remember to paint inside of the mask, otherwise you're gonna paint on top of some parts of the picture. And that's more like it. And you can actually add as many layers as you want to one clipping mask. So if I wanted this levels to be part of this clipping mask as well and not affect the rest of the picture, I could simply just Alt click again between these two layers, and then the levels will only be affecting the kid. And there's no amount of layers, there's no limit to the amount of layers which can be included inside of the clipping mask. The clipping mask needs to be below, so whenever you want to include something in the clipping mask, it needs to be above the clipping mask. When you're inside of Photoshop, in Illustrator it's exactly the opposite. The clipping mask needs to be on top in Illustrator for it to work. So there is some differences between the two programs. Enough about this. Okay, that's what we're looking at: layer adjustments, masks in layer adjustments, and clipping masks. So basically that's some exercise I think you should go home and try out yourself. But let's look at another picture. I'm just gonna close this one down. Sorry boy, you're going down. Don't save. Because now we're just gonna make a quick exercise. You see there's one called folder called clipping mask right here, and I'll just open that up in Photoshop. Crystal.jpg. Some of you are thinking, is that from Breaking Bad? I hope none of you have been taking stuff from Breaking Bad. Yeah, that's Walter White's best mix. The cook. Okay, so let's just try writing some text. Let's take our type tool. And I'm just gonna write. You can write whatever you want. I'm gonna write. Yeah, meth. Okay. Okay, perhaps that's weird. I'm a teacher, so perhaps I should just. Mad. Perhaps I should just write not as amphetamine, but as Aalborg Metal Festival. Yeah. Okay. Where is Frankie when you need him to support you in your metal stuff? And yeah, I already pre-selected some font. I'm using Litus Pro. Litus means rock. This font looks like something that's written in rock. Carved in rock. Yeah. So what I'm gonna do is actually I want the crystal to become inside of this text. And right now the text is gonna be the clipping mask, and I told you that you need the picture that goes inside the clipping mask to go on top of your clipping mask. So we actually need to unlock this layer, the background layer, by either just clicking the lock once, boom, then it deattaches itself. Unless you're using CS6, then you'll have to double click the background and then click OK. And then we put the layer 0 on top of the text layer, so you can't see the text layer anymore. It's really important that you wrote something before doing this. So we need to have written something first, and then you can just alt click between the two layers, boom, and you'll see the crystal gets inside the text, which is nice. Okay, so next off we'll need some kind of background. Some of you could just be making a new layer and fill that with some kind of color if you wanted to, but perhaps some of you wanted another texture for the background. So you can just find any picture you got on your computer and put that behind the text. So I'm just gonna say file place perhaps, and notice that when you say file place it becomes a smart object. We're gonna look at smart objects later today, so I'm just gonna say place embedded I don't want it to be linked to some file, some weird place on my computer. So I'm gonna say place embedded, and I know that I got some files which you don't have, so that's okay, cool. But you can just find whatever you want on your computer to use as a background. You probably have some kind of pictures on your computer which you can use. I'm going to UV Vorbereiter, Photoshop Block 5, I think it is. Art and collage. You don't have this one. You don't have it, and it's sweet. I like it. So let's perhaps take this one. And right now we are not seeing it correctly because I need to move it down here and make sure that. So what happened when I placed it? Actually, we'll just try. I'll try showing you again because a problem occurred. It wasn't really a problem. Nothing in life really is if you handle it the right way. Well, okay, let's not get philosophical. So I'm gonna place again, and you see what happens. Whoa! Suddenly my texture becomes my clipping mask for this my texture becomes the clipping mask for the crystal, and I need to change that. So I need to just first off click enter, because smart objects come in with a show transform control, kind of like when you use free transform. So I'm gonna put this below, and I'm gonna alt click between the text and the crystal again, like that. Okay, and I can just go into free transform once again with the texture I put in, and I'm just gonna make it a bit bigger. And some of you are like, hey, you're not allowed to drag something bigger because that will make the pixels seem bigger and thus more noisy. No, because it's placed as a smart object inside of my picture, and that actually means that it's only 33% of its original size. You can see that up here. A smart object always remembers how it was placed inside the picture. It remembers its original dimensions. So you can actually stretch this. You can see you can actually stretch this all the way out to around here before it actually attains its original proportions. You can see it says 100% by width and height now. So we're actually not damaging this layer. That's one of the nice parts about smart objects. They remember how they originally looked. And why do I know this is a smart object? Because you can always see something as a smart object by looking down inside of the layers panel. There'll be this small icon looking like a file icon. Every time you see, if you ever see this inside of your layers panel, it means it's a smart object. And we'll be talking about smart objects more today, because there are really some advantages you can get from using smart objects. Okay, I'm gonna click enter just to get this transform controls away. And okay, so right now this text is not standing out much from the background, so we are gonna include something extra. We're gonna include some effects, and we have effects inside a filter, but I actually want these effects to come around the edge of the text. And if I use filter, it's just gonna be the stuff inside of the letters I'm gonna affect. But I actually want something that's outside. I want a drop shadow, because otherwise right now it seems like it's flat. It seems like this texture is just put directly on top of the other texture, and that the texture is two-dimensional compared to each other. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna double click my text layer right here. Gonna double click my text layer, not on top of where it says AMF and not on top of where it says T, because if I double click on T, it's just gonna let me edit my text. And if I double click right here, it's gonna let me rename the layer. So I'm gonna double click somewhere out here, and it will get me inside of what is known as the layer style. It should be said that layer style is also located inside of the menu called layer, but it's just much faster just to double click down here. So, but if you really want to go up here all the time, then okay, find it yourself. I'm not gonna show where it is. Okay, so I'm gonna, this box is really big, so sometimes you just need to have half of it not being shown on screen, because it can be hard to see the picture behind as well. When working with a dialog box this big, it's actually nice if you had two screens to work on. So some graphics designers decide to use two screens to work on, then you can put all of your essential stuff on the screen next to it, all the important tools, and you can just see the picture on the screen to your left, tools on the screen to your right. So working with two screens. Okay, so I'm just gonna click drop shadow. I'm gonna make sure that we put some drop shadow in that, and you'll notice that, hey, something happened. Just a tiny thing happened when I clicked it on. And I want it not to be a tiny thing, but to be a huge thing. So let's click once on top of the text drop shadow. And here we'll go in to change the distance, spread and size of our drop shadow, and you'll notice that it will become more what you actually want. And when you've set the shadow to fall, to look as you want it, you can actually just add some opacity to make it even stand out more. You can also change the angle the light is coming in, hitting the letters in. So if I wanted the sun to come from another direction, I could change the angle. It doesn't have to be the sun, it could be studio lighting. I don't care. So you can change the light direction here. The global light, in general, it's a great idea to use global light, because that means if you're using any other effects that take into account which direction the light is coming from, those other effects will use the same settings when it comes to which direction is the light coming into the object from. Otherwise, it's kind of weird that your one effect use lighting from one direction, another lighting from another direction. It's gonna look perhaps a bit weird. Perhaps you're gonna make it look nice. I don't care. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, so when we're happy with this, you can also actually, oh yeah, one thing that's important to say is also the noise level down here. So when often you'll have a background which perhaps is a bit noisy, where there's a lot of stuff going on, perhaps it's not 100% clean. If it is very noisy, and I must say this background is a bit noisy, then it's often a good idea to include noise inside of the shadow as well, inside of this drop shadow, because that will, if you look closer to it, I'm just gonna make it more extreme now. You can see that it will make some fuzziness inside of the drop shadow. This is too much, but that was just so you can see it on board. I'm probably gonna set mine to like perhaps 10 to 20. Okay, so let's set some bevel and emboss as well. That's gonna make a three-dimensional effect. So I'm just gonna click bevel and emboss, and I'm gonna click inside of the menu bevel and emboss, and we can just increase the depth, size. Watch out with that size, because it's really not much you need to do before it changes entirely its appearance. And soften, watch out with that as well, because it will make the edges become less three-dimensional, and so it's gonna look like chocolate instead of rock, because the hard edges will disappear of the three dimensionality. Chocolate. Whoa. Perhaps I should get some chocolate in the break. That would be nice. Okay. There's also the option of actually changing how much brightness the light areas becomes and how dark the dark areas become. So that's down here in the shading. You can also choose which highlight mode it's using. That's the blend mode. If you use some of the other, it will appear differently in its way of highlighting the edges. You see here, color dodge, it's gonna make it light blue instead of white. And you can just choose between whichever one you feel is most natural to the letters. This, for example, this linear dodge made it appear more plastic. So it's just a matter of choosing the right one for you. Right one for you, yeah. And also, some of you are really much into this one called contour, which is a bit hard to see if you don't zoom in. So I'm just gonna zoom in to the F. See right here, the contour. Some of you are thinking that the contour will be what's out here. It's not. The contour is the bevel and emboss contour. The area that makes it look three-dimensional. So this area right here, the bevel and emboss contour, will stand out more if you change the range to a proper value. Oh. And also we can put some texture in. There are some preset textures already inside of your that's below contour. There are some predefined textures inside of pattern. You can actually make your own patterns inside of Photoshop, so you don't have to use these ones included already. But that's part of second semester, showing you stuff like that. So whenever you find something you like, it's actually just a matter of being happy with it. I think because this looks so 80s, this wavy pattern, I think I'll go with that. But perhaps I think the waves are looking too big or too small. Well, then you can just adjust the scale. You can make them bigger by setting the scale up. You can make them smaller by setting it down. And I actually think around 149 is appropriate. Perhaps I'll change the depth so it doesn't look as intense, or so it looks even more intense. That's just the height of the texture. See, if you see the texture as mountains standing up, that's just the height of the mountains. You have a lot of more textures down. You have a lot of more layer styles down here, so you can just try experimenting with them. Right now, I'm gonna give you a break, so feel free to experiment in the break, because I don't want to experiment. I just want to get my cigarette and my coffee.